Okay, I woke up this morning and, I have my quiet time, and then I look. I don't know why I do this. I guess it's just to get my blood going, but I get the AP's morning update in my email inbox. And here was the top story: U.S. states cite smooth, well-run election, disputing Trump's baseless claims. Analysis: GOP lets doubts about Biden's legitimacy flourish. In other words, the Republicans are sticking with the president because they know that something's wrong. They smell a rat, and they're wanting to get to the bottom of this. Well, join me now with more on what is happening in these election challenges across the country is the president of the American Conservative Union, Matt Schlapp, who is helping lead the legal charge in Nevada. Matt, welcome to Washington Watch.
Great to be with you, Tony.
So, is the AP right that there's no claims, these are all baseless, that there's voter fraud and irregularities out there?
Dead people voting, kids voting, people outside the state voting. It's all in a day's work, Tony. I don't know why we get too alarmed about it. I mean, if your family member votes after they die and they vote for socialism, I guess that's just part of what we have to deal with.
But here's something, and I've been a part of some of these voter challenges before, the election challenges, because there was voter fraud. The rules are set so that it's very hard to make a challenge because of the short window. But the president has the determination for the benefit of the country, because he sees what's at stake. He's battled this for the last 4 years. What are you seeing on the ground? You're in Nevada. Let's start there.
Well, I am back in the D.C. area, but I was in Nevada for a number of days, and I'm staying in touch with it. And what I saw, Tony, was, like you, I've been involved in politics for a long time. I've never run for public office like you, but I didn't know what to expect. I'd always heard that Clark County is one of the most corrupt, the Harry Reid machine, one of the most corrupt counties in the country. So when I was dispatched out there, I thought, well, let's see what's going on. And I just couldn't believe what we found. I mean, dead people voting is one thing. Kids voting is another. A whole orchestrated effort to give ballots out in the mail to people who are not legally and lawfully registered, including a lot of people outside the state. By last count, it was probably over 9,000, and that number is going north. And I just was shocked to see that much of it. And then when you realize 600,000 ballots through the mail that no Republican observer could touch, watch, check, anything, and then you realize that the computer that they used to check the signature file on the ballot against the DMV and the other government databases, that computer had essentially been dumbed down to a point where it was meaningless. That means that if they really did have a whole project to get fraudulent votes in via this mail-in voting, there's going to be thousands of additional ballots where the signatures don't match. And it's too late to fix those, cure those, as they say in politics. So I think Nevada is disgusting, and I wanted to take a shower. I just couldn't believe what we found.
Now, I also want to point out that these are not just rumors, internet rumors. There's a lot of stuff on the internet these days. I mean, you saw this firsthand. There's been affidavits, sworn affidavits. That means you sign out a complaint, you swear out a complaint under the penalty of perjury. That's been sworn out. In fact, I think I saw where there was a Biden van that was basically passing out ballots, and there's been affidavits sworn about that.
Yeah, there's a whistleblower who came forward, and he saw in his lunch hour a Biden-Harris kind of area, a van and a tent that was several feet or yards away from the voting at a precinct station. And the person basically saw ballot harvesting, where there were ballots that were unopened, that they were opening up, filling in, putting in the, I think they're pinkish white envelopes, and then turning them in as votes. So it was two people doing all the filling in, voting in all these ballots. So this is exactly the type of thing that that Democrats say does not happen. But I think they were just so aggressive this time, and they were so, Stacey Abrams and others have told everybody what they intended to do, that they think this should be lawful, that anybody can vote in early vote on election day, and my God, even after, even like 3 to 5 to 10
Right.
days after an election. And they said what they're going to do. And Tony, I think they really did it. And I think it made a big difference in Philadelphia. I think it made a big difference in Vegas. I think it made a big difference in Detroit. I think it made a big difference in Milwaukee. And it's just statistically impossible that the Republican Party and the president could have done so well in Senate, congressional, governor, state legislative contest. And out of nowhere, in these big cities, in a handful of states, he didn't meet his numbers.
Yeah, we had a statistician on yesterday talking about, especially in Michigan, where only the top of the ticket was voted. About a 15% increase in the 2020 election versus the 2015. Statistically, that's an anomaly that needs explanation. And that came off the Secretary of State's website, so that we're working with their own numbers. Speaking of Michigan, I think I've seen reports where 10,000 mail-in ballots coming from deceased in Michigan. Yesterday, the campaign unveiling 234 pages, I think it was, of sworn affidavits, I think primarily focused on Michigan. I mean, that would suggest to me that there's a lot out there.
Yeah, no, and the other thing is I saw Tom Tillis, he was on Fox News after me on the Bill Hemmer show, and they said, look, Matt Schlapp is on claiming this election fraud irregularity, but he has no proof. Of course, I have names and addresses. Like, we have lots of proof. Like, that's just a canard that there's no proof. But then when you have the proof, they say, well, you need even more proof. And then when you have even more proof, they say you have to have overwhelming proof. Like, we'll never be able to satisfy the media's lust to have Joe Biden be the next president. But Tom Tillis said something very interesting. He just won his election from North Carolina, and you'll remember, Tony, that there was a Republican who won a congressional race not that long ago who was convicted of ballot harvesting.
One of his staff members was convicted.
That's right.
He actually worked for me.
He was forced to vacate.
Yeah.
Did he? So
I know all about that.
I'm right to say that for Democrats, they found plenty of fraudulent activity when it involved a Republican staffer. But, when it involves Democrat fraud, it's like, well, there's no fraud in this country. Well, that's just not right. We just had a conviction in the state of North Carolina.
Yeah, well, the elections board is controlled by the Democrats, is the issue. And the one who works for me is actually the guy who was the candidate, not the one that was involved in he was totally unaware of what the staff member was doing. But it was ruled as ballot harvesting. What actually happened in California and what is happening in what you just described in Nevada, that was ballot harvesting, which the Democrats are perfecting.
Let's say in North Carolina the Democrats were too harsh on these people, these Republicans. My only point is that it was the Democrats being harsh on Republicans and saying clearly voter fraud exists. And then when we have thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of examples of fraudulent activity, they're like, well, there's no voter fraud in this country.
Well, it's because it's
unbelievable.
The enforcement board is controlled by Democrats, so they overlook it.
That's right. And they've convinced the media through these bogus academic studies that voter fraud isn't a thing. And I'm telling you, after coming back from Clark County, it's not just a thing. It's a cancer. If President Trump doesn't keep fighting, we're going to be in big trouble.
Let me ask you this from a standpoint, you've worked very closely with the campaign. I know you've been on the ground at these different places in Nevada. In your opinion, is this a coordinated effort on the left?
I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but they seem to do all the same things. And they got all their laws changed either through the legislature in the case of Nevada or through fiat with statewide office holders. They changed their voting rules right before an election. It was all about mail-in ballots because of the virus panic. And I think that the thing that makes me the most upset is they dirtied the voting rolls so that more inappropriate, unregistered ballots would be out and about. Why would you do that if you're an election official? Why would you purposely send out a list without checking it by death rolls, by national change of address for people who have moved, by date to make sure minors don't vote? Why wouldn't you make all those checks if you didn't intend to make it easier for people to vote fraudulently? Why would you not allow observers into the count room, which we've essentially done for a couple of centuries in this country. And we make other democracies do that so that we can accept their election results overseas. Why did they keep us out? I mean, I've never heard of somebody keeping somebody out because they want the world to know they're going to do a virtuous thing. This is it was all the same in all these big cities. And if they cheated as much as it looks like they cheated, they might have just blown their own cover.
I hope they have. Now, I will, just from a historical perspective, I was involved in a race in 1996, a Senate race in which there was voter fraud. We took the challenge to the U.S. Senate, and I regret to say that the Republican senators basically caved and seated the Democrat in that race. I am encouraged by what I see among Republicans standing with the president right now. Mitch McConnell, I've talked to a number of senators, members in the House. They are standing firm with the president. That's encouraging. What came out of that 96 race in my home state of Louisiana, we didn't win the race, but the next year—
Was that Woody Jenkins?
Yeah, it was. I was his campaign manager.
Yeah. I remember that race.
Well, the following year, we had election reform and changed our laws in Louisiana to clean that up, and we've not had major election fraud in the country, in the state since then. So while my hope is that this is cleared up and we see who really won this race, and it was President Trump, secondary that there is a cleanup of election laws and that this is not allowed to happen again.
Yeah, I think that's right. Look, I think that can be an outgrowth of this, that they're not going to be able to have this kind of corrupt process. And I think it also puts a real spotlight on what the president was saying about this forced, mail voting, which he was right. He was right to try to highlight it. I will just simply say, I'm not saying that I know what's going to happen in all this, but I've spent some time scrutinizing what happened in Nevada and these other states. And I will say this: I think the president has the right to take every reasonable step to try to get justice on all this illegal voting. And I think everybody ought to let him have that shot, just like Bush and Gore had that shot.
Yep.
And I would just say this, as far as the state legislators and as far as Mitch McConnell and the Senate Republicans, one of the reasons they're being so solid is that Republicans, conservatives, and Trump supporters, even Politico said that over 70% of them think that this was stolen. That means that the number is much, much higher. And I would not want to be a Republican to say, hey, we just got to get over election fraud and deal with it. And as I said on TV today, suck it up, Buttercup. I don't think that's the right answer.
No.
And I don't think the Republican electorate is going to take that answer from any elected Republican.
No, you see what's happening in this, and I'm going to talk about this tomorrow on the program, but how you have corporations now targeting these law firms that are representing Trump. I mean, this is more of the intolerance of the left, and I think people need to realize what's in store if the left is left unchecked. And I am so grateful that the president is willing to stand up and take the brunt of this to get to the bottom of it, because it's not going to make it more palatable, but I can accept it. If the president fights all the way through and we find out the outcome wasn't what we wanted, at least I can accept it as legitimate. I can't accept it as legitimate right now.
Well, you're with where Republicans are all across the country. And let me just tell you, my nieces and nephews are texting me. A lot of the young voters have woken up to this because they just don't think that this was right. They're smarter than to believe the statistics around how this could have possibly happened when Republicans are going to pick up probably double digits in the House by the time we're done.
Right. Matt Schlapp, thanks so much for joining us today, and thanks for staying in the fight.
Tony Perkins, keep up the good work.